If we just press enough buttons, it'll work, right?
I think I can hear now. Can everybody hear now? Give us a thumbs up in the chat window. Stuart Lang, Jeep NL, I like your name, says sound. And now Scott Addy, who we can trust,
This is all wonderful.
says he can hear us. This is
Great.
good.
Okay. Oh my gosh. So part of my deal is I do some Twitch streaming on my Mac, and I do this on my Windows machine, and switching audio devices back and forth, it always loses them. All right.
Mhm.
Well, great. So we're going to do a SignalR show. Let me start off with some community links. So let's dig right into those. I'm going to blaze through them. There's always some wonderful links. Love to share them.
Blaze
Yes.
through them. Was that intentional?
There are some Blazor links. Yes. Cool. And on the chat, make sure people can hear me. I see my audio devices moving, so it looks like we're good. People will complain, I guess, if we can't. Martin Below, he's talking about building ASP.NET Core tag helpers to show hide UI elements based on authorization. So this is a cool thing. He's doing this for his speaker travel app that he's building. So I think that's just a really nice thing that you can build tag helpers throughout your applications. It makes it really easy to reuse UI and functionality without kind of cluttering up your front end views. So here he creates that. Somebody's typing super loud, and I bet it's Brady.
It is.
I don't know though how much it comes through the. So anyhow, going through registering it and some notes at the end, but for the most part pretty straightforward. It's nice too that you can do this using when I end up doing this, I'll look at the file new project templates because there are some login logout things also there. Cool. So Chris Saney is continuing his mobile Blazor bindings series. Here he's looking at state management. So looking at different things, storing state and components, app state, etc. It's interesting to me on these to watch the the model because it's Blazor and Xamarin Forms together. So it's interesting to kind of think through some of those things. It's but so definitely with an application, mobile application, you need to understand things like your offline data and app sync and all that kind of stuff. So very cool. Okay, Damian Bowden. I'm partly just pointing this out to remind people that he's got this really cool library and he's been doing some stuff with certificate management. So there is some stuff for certificate management, built into ASP.NET Core, and he's built some nice helper libraries on top of it, and then also blogging things like how to implement in your ASP.NET Core applications. So certificates from Azure Key Vault, definitely important. You don't want to be managing your own certificates anywhere near your app if you can help it. So here he's walking through how to set that up, how to configure that in Azure Key Vault, and then how to pull those in and use those in your application. So stuff.
Damian's great. We had him on our .NET Twitch stream for the Docs show just recently. He's amazing.
Yeah. And one thing that I love about what he does is he actually very regularly will go back and update his previous blog posts. And I always feel like I'll look at that and go like, oh man, I should do that more. But it's really
guilty
cool.
of that too. Yeah.
People do that?
He does. He actually does. And it'll be really cool. And it'll post like update notes at the top. All right, Shahed, blogging up a storm as always. So here he's talking about organizational accounts for ASP.NET Core 3.1. Talking about the different options available, different org types and stuff. Beautiful diagram, Shahed, so thank you for that. The obvious kind of how you can configure it when you create your application, what you're doing there, but then some other things like app registration, how you set that up in Azure. I've used this in some applications, and it does take a little bit of setup, but it's pretty cool once you get it configured. It's really nice to be able to manage inside your application. And then, so here's talking about how you manage that inside your app, and some more advanced configuration. I'm going a little bit fast because I know we have a hard stop at the end, and I want to see all your demos. So. Okay, cool. David Ramel in Visual Studio Magazine writing about 3 Blazor extensions for Visual Studio Code. So one is the ASP.NET Core switcher. And the nice thing that this does is it makes it easy to switch between your view code and your code, your kind of code behind. So in MVC, this will make it easy to switch between a view and a controller. Razor Pages switches between a page and its page model. And then in Blazor, switching between the Razor and the Razor CS. So definitely a handy extension there. Razor
cool.
Plus is provides some advanced, some better syntax colorization. So nice. And then finally, Blazor snippets. So handy to have additional snippets always. I never mind that. And then here is also linking to this Blazor snippet pack, which will pull those in. Stuff. Okay, Jeremy Miller writing about using Alba, which is a library he writes for integration testing with ASP.NET Core web services. So here, this is really cool. He's had the Fubu MVC project for years, and a lot of cool things that were built as part of that have been kind of moved over. So here he's talking about HTTP contract testing. And so the idea here, he kind of walks through an example, doing a simple math API, and just kind of talks about how he creates some reusable infrastructure so that his tests are a lot more lightweight. So setting up a fixture, and then he's using the built-in HTTP what is it? The factory stuff that's in ASP.NET Core, but kind of wrapping it in this integration context. And so the end result of that is tests can be pretty lightweight because all they need to do is, just inherit from this integration context, and then the test itself is super lightweight. So kind of neat stuff. Open telemetry. So on last week's show, we talked one of the links I shared had some open telemetry stuff in it, and Saurabh pointed out that the team, the .NET team itself, is working with open telemetry and integrating that in. So that is pretty cool. So the OpenTelemetry.NET SDK, some of the work that's in progress, includes work in the framework, and then there's also this OpenTelemetry SDK NuGet package to make it easier. So the end result here is that library authors simply write platform standard API, and it just lights up in OpenTelemetry. That is really neat. So the context I was mentioning it in last time was Jimmy Bogart was writing a decent amount of code to light up telemetry throughout a pretty complex microservice app, and in this case here, this is hopefully making it simpler to do that. All right, congrats to the Project Thai team. Man, they are tearing it up. So this is release 0.1. And so here they're showing, release notes. They updated docs. It's kind of funny. I went through a Twitch stream and failed horribly on some of the steps, and so they added some idiot-proof notes on that, which was I'm glad to have added some value there. And so some great. I love their docs, and I love their it continues here in their release notes, all the stuff they're writing up. So things like, and I'm going to have to dig into this more, but some things like, so Brady, feel free to jump in, and I'm sorry for shaming you for typing loud. Feel free to, it's a party.
Everybody does it. It's fine. I actually worked with Glenn the other day. I haven't done much with Thai, but the other day I worked with Glenn a little bit, and we were able to get the Thai repository configured in a fork that I have, so that you could have the Open in Visual Studio Online button on the repo. So you could actually click it, and not only could you build in the cloud, but you could code in the cloud as well. So you could actually use Thai from within a VSO environment to party on it. It was pretty cool. There's a bit of setup now because you have to kind of customize the container that the VSO instance starts up to do some Docker stuff that you can't do without it. But I think that was a pretty fun experiment. So if people are interested in that, reach out. We can definitely get you the fork and maybe see if you can make it even better for us. It was a cool idea.
Very cool. One other thing I wanted to point out in here towards the end, and I love this, like the dashboard's looking good. One other thing that I'm really happy about is look at all these community contributions. I want to especially call out Simon Kropp, man. He's just tearing it up. Look at all these contributions and across the rest of the community. So this is really cool. It's good to see people jumping in. The last link I have to share is this Dev Around the Sun. And this is just kind of an upcoming thing that the community is putting on. I just wanted to let people know about it. So this is coming up May 12th. And this is being put on the .NET Foundation's helping out, a lot of community leaders, buddy Jeff Fritz, so it's just excited to see this kind of shaping up. And all the links are here, and I will share this out in the chat and in the show notes. But first, I'm going to pass it back over to, over to you. Okay, so I think you're muted.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, cool. What do you got for us?
Awesome. Well, I just wanted to talk about a couple of quick things, and I wanted to introduce our good friend, Mr. Pine here. David was working in the, I think I'm going to say this right, the Cognitive Services authoring team. Is that right?
Yep.
And he, this week, is joining the .NET authoring team. So let's welcome David to our lovely family of awesome writers. David and I have long been tinkering around with SignalR and Blazor ideas. Some of you may be familiar with his Chuck Norris experiment, but we can talk about that. John pinged me and let me do a quick screen share and make sure I'm on the right browser window here before I jump to it. John pinged me the other day and he asked me if there was anything I wanted to show around SignalR, and I couldn't remember what I showed the last time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I want to highlight a couple of really important features that we shipped in our last wave. I'll wait until one of y'all confirm that you can see my screen okay.
I got it.
Cool. I think I talked about this last time, but I do want to point out, you can see here that I'm on the .NET client. And if I were to flip over here, you can actually see on the JavaScript client that we recently added automatic reconnection. So in the old days of SignalR, we would do a lot of crazy things like try to replay messages and whatnot and try to reconnect our clients. We don't do that stuff in SignalR core anymore. But what we have added in a recent update is the ability for you to add automatic reconnection. And if you look in the docs, you'll see that we have a couple nice ways that we can do this. Essentially, if you just call the with automatic reconnect method, whenever your client disconnects from the hub, it will automatically start trying to reconnect. You can customize that. We have information in the docs on how to do that. We've also added on reconnecting and on reconnected methods so that you can handle those methods to kind of change your UI to tell people, you can't take action now, you're disconnected, wait a second, whatever you want to do. But you can actually use that to kind of sugar up the UI and make sure they don't do something while they're disconnected. You can also scroll down lower in the code, and you'll see here that we have a couple different ways that you can customize that with automatic reconnect behavior. If you're on the .NET client side, you can actually pass in time span objects here instead of just passing in ints to describe the number of milliseconds that you can wait. This is one of my favorite new features in SignalR. I know a lot of customers have been asking for this. I, as well as many other customers, always had interesting ways of accommodating this type of what we like to call the tunnel effect. John, I think we've talked about this in some of the mobile demos we've done before, like signals go in and out.
Yeah.
What you do. So in this case, we've kind of given you that capability. And like I mentioned, it's also in the .NET client. So you can do things in the .NET client as well. And,
I got to use this in a demo I did, and it's really fun. Like you have to write the code for on reconnected and all that kind of stuff, but it just, when it works, it's like, yes, it's so cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It is cool. And I bring up the .NET client for a specific reason. Recently, our hero, Mr. Daniel Roth, PM extraordinaire, Blazor creator du jour, let everybody know that we had Preview 1 update. And since then, I think we've done Preview 2 and Preview 3, and we'll continue to do updates on it. But one thing that we did in this update, if I scroll here and make everybody dizzy, was that we added support for the .NET SignalR client. Now, folks like myself who've been doing SignalR for years, the idea of having a signal come in from the server and hit my back end, and then I could pop a message up to the client was just always, second nature to me. But when I started doing things with Blazor, it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be to kind of tie those two items together. We actually had a label in our GitHub issue tracker called SignalR Loves Blazor, just so we made sure that everything we did around there was, we were trying to accrue to a better relationship between the SignalR clients and Blazor itself. We've actually been able to do that here. So you can see that in this case, Dan kind of walks through an example that David's going to do an interesting job of here in a minute. I've got a hub that runs on the server with my server-side host, my Blazor WebAssembly app. I wire up in my chat hub just like I always have in the past. But then when you get into the actual C# code in my client, you can see here that I'm newing up a hub connection. And I'm in the onInitialized async method, I'm actually creating that connection, building it, and then wiring up all of my event handlers for my hub events and calling start async. So this is where I get to actually use .NET code rather than JavaScript code directly inside my Blazor pages so that I can use Blazor and SignalR client together. The docs are fun, but I know demos are a lot more fun. And I know my good buddy David Pine has a pretty awesome demo. So I'm going to stop my screen share here and turn it over to Mr. Pine and let him blow our minds for a minute.
Yeah. So I'll share my screen in a second, but I want to add a little bit more context. So last year in October, I was getting ready to board a plane to Bulgaria to give a talk on SignalR, and I was in communication with Brady, and he was trying to convince me to switch over my app that was using Blazor extensions at the time, right? It was the only .NET capability to use like the .NET client, and that's when we actually uncovered a bug. Do you remember that? Like there was an issue where WebAssembly and like the Blazor implementation actually was using SignalR under the covers, right? And I don't recall correctly what the issue was, if it was like a singleton or something, but we couldn't have multiple SignalR channels from the same ASP.NET Core host was pretty much the end game.
Yeah.
So I ended up using JavaScript, and you're like, so you reach out yesterday and you're like, hey, I have an idea. And I was like, yeah, what's your idea? Do you want to come on the show? And I was like, oh my God, yes, let's do it. So I'll share my screen now. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep.
Candy.
Okay. So the demonstration that I had prepared was a demo that I gave in DevReach in Bulgaria last year in the fall, but that was the JavaScript version. So Brady says, can you do that in .NET now with the .NET client? And I said, sure. So I wrote this last night, borrowing a bunch of the bits from before, but basically it's following Dan Roth's blog where you do like file new, you get the SignalR bits, so you have a WebAssembly Blazor application, so you get the goodness of like a shared class library, so you have just Poco sitting here, and those can be shared on the server and the client, which is nice. And then the server, as you'd imagine, is pretty straightforward. We have our startup, and I have some Blazor Twitter services that I'll register. So in here we add SignalR, and then this specific application is actually going to rely on Twitter. And the intent of the application is to have essentially a filtered Twitter stream. So I have some handles and hashtags that we're concerned with, and I have a hosted service that runs here. So I'll show you that, the Twitter service. And the hosted service basically sits here and acts as a background service, right? So with the ASP.NET Core, background services are in-process services that run outside of the context of the request-response pipeline. So I'm relying on a filtered stream, and this is coming from Tweet Envy, I believe is the enunciation of that. And it's just a Twitter.NET SDK. And we'll instantiate the stream, we'll wire up to some events, and when those filtered tweets come back in, we can broadcast those back out over SignalR to the client that will be listening to them. So this is the server bits, right? And then the client is full-on WebAssembly, Blazor, which is awesome. They've made some improvements to actually enable the async main, which I think that was, while it was introduced, it was like C# 7.1 or something like that. I don't think you could do that before with Blazor. Now you can. So then we have our index, and this is where things get into like the fun parts, right? So one of the interesting things is you'll see a lot of people using like the little code, like @ code, and then that's where you kind of ingest your C#. Instead, I have just my markup, and I'm inheriting from an index component. That index component is essentially like the code behind for the application, right? So this is where you get first class representation of C#. And so we have a component that inherits from component base. We have a couple of properties, right? So we have a status message, whether or not we're streaming, whether or not we're actually connected to our connection. And this is in the client app, this is where we're actually consuming the .NET SignalR SDK. So we have those hashtags and handles. We have some tweets. Again, the tweet result here, this is coming from our shared library. So the server has that same interaction, which is nice. They can use those same objects. We have a navigation manager, a JavaScript runtime, and this is where things get a little bit disheartening. So don't be too upset. With the Twitter, when the tweets come through and they render, we just get a blob of HTML. So in order for them to actually update and look like an actual tweet, we have a bit of JavaScript, and this is where I have to nudge the Twitter card. So this is the only JavaScript. There's no other JavaScript hidden up my sleeves here. So if we go back over here, so then we've got some.
That's not very much JavaScript.
That's not, no, that's 5 lines, right? So it's not super upsetting. And then go ahead.
I just want to make sure you're romancing the fact that you have 2 files open there, not one. And
yeah.
The CS file there makes me very happy. I think I'd love to hear in the chat, does the separation of the Razor and the CS make folks happy? It definitely does me. I was excited to see David implement that. Or I was excited to see that feature show up, I guess, is what I should say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I for one, I like the separation. I'm not afraid to say it, I'm an Angular fan. So a lot of people are either Angular or React or insert other thing, but I like the separation, and React is kind of a mixed bag. So that's one thing I was trying to avoid. So I like having just the C# class. So we have this on initialized async. We instantiate our connection builder, and then we use the navigation manager to get our stream hub, right? So this is our hub that we have. And then we can wire up to the events just as you would on any hub connection. So we have our tweet results. When it's received, we'll add it to our collection. We'll state, we'll invoke the state has changed to let the WebAssembly app update its representation. And then after that, we fire and forget. And again, this is where I apologize for the bit of JavaScript where we nudge the Twitter card.
I have to say, I get it because you're working to do it all kind of, beautiful and architecturally, right? But I think actually, I love that you're not stuck with, it's not an either or. You can use JavaScript as much as you want. You know what I mean? So you're never kind of like locked in, because I've worked on things and it's like, hey, here's a nice JavaScript library. I'll go ahead and use it. It's like, yeah.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. Like, I actually hit David up recently and I said, dude, I have this audio project. You both know about it. I think the internet knows about it now. I've been working on this audio project for a while, and I said, I want to invoke sounds in the client, but I want to do it from within Blazor. And he sends me Howler.js. And there's apparently a Blazor wrapper for it as well, but it's great. Like, if you've got great JavaScript libraries, just you can party on them,
Yep.
Yeah. And that's the nice thing about this. Like, the companion repository actually exemplifies the same verbatim demo, but using the JavaScript equivalent, right? So we have our status here, and then we start it, and then I'll add the tracks. These are the tracks that we have here on the client. And then it's just basically the romance of interacting with the hub and updating things. So let's just run it real quick. And I will admit that earlier this morning when I was running it, I hit rate limiting because I was doing some final tweaks. So hopefully I've laid off. I've been off of it for like 4 or 5 hours now. So hopefully it'll work.
Oh, rate limiting.
Don't you love rate limiting?
Yes. So what are the hashtags where you're going to look for? I guess that'll pop up in your UI in a minute.
Yeah. So hashtag SignalR, hashtag Blazor,
there we go.
Hashtag developer community at .net and at my handle. So wait for it to start. And then while it's loading, it's going to open up Chrome. I have a tweet here that I've prepared ever so elegantly that I will tweet. But once our WebAssembly app launches, we'll get a better kind of contextual setting of what this app does.
Is this evidence of that things for some strange reason when you're screen sharing on Teams or any other screen sharing program, when you try to run your app, it always runs a little slower?
I definitely agree with that. Yeah,
Okay.
This morning it was so much faster.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's weird. Let me just run this over here. Make that like that. Wait for it. Blazing.net tweets. Loading, please wait. All right, so we're connecting. All right, Twitter stream resumed. So now if anyone around the world is to tweet any of these hashtags or handles, our application will pick it up. So that's where I encourage viewers to do that. But I've got one here, so I'll tweet it right now. You saw on Twitter, it is now live. Ta-da! We're going to minimize that. Go back over here. Boom. Right. So now it's already picking these up. You can see that the tweets are coming in live. They're coming in hot. People are tweeting them. And as they come in, so on the back end, the hosted service has access to the Twitter APIs. We're filtering streams specifically to those hashtags and handles. And as people tweet them live, our service will push them through, and SignalR will pick them up, and then the WebAssembly app here will display them. You can see lots of love.
This is cool.
And now we need multiple columns, and I'll just start using this instead of what I use.
And I always like to tell people, like, okay, I would dare you to like say something offensive or upsetting or potentially whatever. But I don't like doing that. And one of the reasons I don't is because it's not great for demos. But I actually do have as an added bonus here in the application. When we go back over to the Twitter service, one of the neat things is if the tweet, like if Twitter believes that it's potentially sensitive, I'll take it a step further, and I actually have the sentiment analysis from ml.net running here as well, where I'll look at the text of the tweet and predict whether or not it has negative sentiment, and if it does, we don't let it through. So I usually have a breakpoint here. So if it's running and people are sending offensive things over, we'll hit this and I'll show them, hey, we're not having that.
So that's not a challenge.
So it's not a challenge. So I just had a great conversation with Bree before our show. She goes, would there ever be room for an ML.net demo on an all web show? I was like, yeah,
absolutely.
So yeah. This is a great example.
ML.net right here. Part of the idea I've always thought with .NET that's so cool is you can do so many things with it, and it's great to see the things kind of cross over. Like we've had Blazor mobile bindings, and we've had all kind of, some of the stuff we're doing with microservices is kind of crossing over into the, so absolutely. Yeah, I'll work with Bree. We'll definitely get around to show that.
So I don't know if there's any questions. If anyone is curious about anything, if you want me to dive into any more of the code, I'd be happy to show that off. Otherwise, I can stop sharing my screen too.
Cool. And I'm here as well to answer any questions that you have on this stuff. So I think we had a few already.
Yeah.
Did you queue any up?
I didn't have any extra questions. If you have any that you've answered, that might be good to highlight. There was one question on the automatic reconnection going back a ways. Was somebody said if you don't actually connect, then reconnection doesn't work for them. Like they're expecting that reconnect would work regardless. Does that make sense?
I'm curious about why it wouldn't work. I mean, at this point, you would do this is where you would do with automatic reconnect whenever you're doing your connection. I would say that this is only available in the ASP.NET Core client. So I do want to call that out. This is not available in .NET Framework SignalR. David, I know they want your repo URL, so you might want to pull that up as well before you stop sharing.
Prepared.
Oh,
cool.
Look at that. Okay,
nice.
And I'll paste that in the chat.
Nice. But the other thing to call out is with automatic reconnect, will connect back to the same server. So if for whatever reason, the reason that you've disconnected is because that server has gone bye-bye and like perma bye-bye, you will create a new connection back. So I do want to call that out. With automatic reconnect, is the one caveat is that server has to be there. The server from which you got disconnected needs to be there for you to reconnect to it. If you hit a different server, it's not a reconnection; it's a new connection. I know that's a semantic thing, but some people care. So let's see if there's any other questions.
And for an added bonus, while we were all chatting about auto reconnect, they actually added that to the source code and pushed that up to the repository, so people will have that.
Oh, nice.
Cool. Nice. Any Blazor Web RTC API JS interop? David, have you ever done anything there? I have not.
What was it again? Sorry.
Web RTC API JS interop?
I have not. Is that
That sounds interesting.
Is that the video stuff or no? That's different.
I think it is.
I haven't done anything with that. That sounds cool.
I've done a bunch with actual like native video stuff with Angular JS and stuff like that, but I've never done it with Blazor. I haven't got into that yet.
Okay.
I'd be curious how that would work.
Lewis has a question here. If you could share your screen one more time, David, if you have it up. I'm not sure if I missed this in the beginning, but is SignalR running on the server or WebAssembly? I wanted to call that out. In David's project, he has the server, like in the server project, he's got a normal Blazor WebAssembly project. You can see that in the server project, he's actually got his hub. But then in his client project, that's where he's using the SignalR client. So the SignalR client part is running in WebAssembly, but the hub is running on the server.
Yeah, and my hub is admittedly a lot more complex than probably the standard thing. I was trying to flex a bunch of different muscles for some of the capabilities that aren't normally demonstrated with SignalR. So, and to Brady's point, this is the server. We have a hub on the server, so you get all your native ASP.NET Core SignalR greatness from the server aspect. But then over in the client then also has a dependency on the SignalR client, right? So this is the .NET SignalR client. So SignalR both ways, one's client, one's server. And getting back to like flexing the muscles for the like the strong typing here. So hubs can be, when you inherit from a hub, you can inherit from just hub plain, or you can do it from an actual like of T. So you can add a type parameter. So in this case, I have a bit of complexity with how I've architected this, and it's somewhat intentional because I want to access my Twitter client and service inside my hosted bits, but then also from my stream hub, but then also from my it's almost like a conflict, if you will, but my Twitter service also takes on the hub context. So there's a bit of, I'm airing out some dirty laundry here in this, and I should probably clean it up, but it's an interesting thing that you're able to do. So my Twitter service takes on the hub context, and as you may know, the hub context is a way to actually have like an abstraction over the actual hub. So I have my hub context of T, where it has the Twitter client. And then with that context, I can still, from this hosted service, pump messages out to the hub that is part of my web app, which is kind of cool.
That is cool. Oh, go ahead.
Well, you go ahead. Okay.
I was just going to say the hub of T is also kind of a new thing for folks who might have done SignalR a lot in framework days, and then came around in core. Essentially, the hub itself, just hub with no inheritance or no generic argument, it's going to basically give you the ability to do not dynamic, because now we've actually got a dynamic hub. And the dynamic hub would use dynamic methods, whereas this hub, you could actually, in this case, David has an iTwitter client. If you think about that T that he's passing in there, that T is essentially this interface, and that is the interface of the clients, not the interface of his hub. So if you think about it, this is the interface that his hub knows how to call. So kind of inside out thinking. But if you've ever, I hate to date myself here, but if you've done something like full duplex WCF in the past where you had to have a service contract and a client contract for that callback, similar to that. But what it does is it gives you, in the .NET side, it gives you that nice type specificity on the client side because you've got the interface that you can kind of bank on. So.
Yeah, exactly. So from the hub context, I can walk up to all the clients and I can broadcast out on a strongly typed interface, right? So this is tweet received. So this isn't normally available, right? This method here, this is something that is specific because my hub context is specifying that type parameter of the Twitter client.
Yeah, you'd either have to call send or invoke, or you'd have to use dynamic and then not give the arguments.
Okay. Nice. One thing, there was a question on the retry policy for reconnect, and you talked about this a little bit before, Brady, with the you can specify times and things. Is that kind of the main? Are there ways of doing kind of more custom policy sorts of things, like an exponential back off or things like that?
Yes, David's doing it right now. So he's actually going to pass in like an array of time spans here, but we do have the capability for you to provide kind of your own logic there. Exponential back off is the default, and it's in the docs. It goes 30, 15, 10, 5, I think. But you can customize that like he's doing here. If you wanted to provide, I think Stephen wrote in another way to do it, but I can't remember what that way was. He's going to look in here. No, he doesn't need to go into the code yet. We talked about, there. So we actually talked about giving you a different type of retry policy for each one. So you could write your own way to do it. So we do have an abstraction there so that if you wanted to write your own with automatic reconnect handler, you could do that. But we've given you automatic back off in the beginning, exponential back off as well. So
the way that would work is you give them an implementation of this interface, and they'll call next retry delay, giving you a context, and from the context you kind of determine how you want to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
That's cool.
There's a question on your experience on maximum number of open connections SignalR can use.
Doesn't that depend on the underlying protocol?
It does. It depends on a lot of things, and I hate to give you an it depends answer. If you want to scale out SignalR, I don't have the slide open, unfortunately. I can find it. But essentially, if you want to go from a hub is server bound. So two cool things to talk about here. This hub that David has lives on the server. And if you wanted to make a call to that server, and then for whatever reason you load balance your app, now you're actually going to have your hub over here and your hub over here. So if your clients connect to this hub and some clients connect to this hub, these two client sets aren't going to be able to talk to one another unless you do what's called a backplane. You put a backplane behind them. Now, right here, David just put up the Azure SignalR service. The Azure SignalR service is a service inside of Azure that gives you the capability to be able to scale out to pretty much infinite numbers of connections. By default, you can enlist in terms of units, and I think you can go. There's a slider. I can't remember what the baseline is, but you can go up to 100,000 concurrent connections on one SignalR service instance. And the documentation talks about if you think you're going to need above 100,000 concurrent connections, you can do what's called sharding and basically create a series of the different Azure SignalR service instances. You can wire them all up, and you can use the documentation is pretty slick and actually goes into how you can use SignalR groups to say people in the East group are going to be on this instance and people in the West group are going to be on this instance, and they round robin everything for you automatically. What that also does, it's a really great sidecar if you want to host your ASP.NET apps or your Blazor apps up in Azure App Service. You can actually add, the tools will do it for you. We'll recommend Azure SignalR Service if you're using SignalR. And what ends up happening is all of your WebSocket traffic, instead of it going directly to your app service and chewing up whatever bandwidth and whatever request pools you want there, you basically take all that WebSocket traffic and you move it over to the Azure SignalR service so that your application server is only serving the HTTP traffic to be able to serve the pages. All of your fast-moving WebSocket connections, those get offloaded over to the Azure SignalR service, and the connections are managed for you on the server side rather than on the client side, in a secure manner. So I do want to point that out.
It's crazy easy to set it up too. It's like one line of code and a configuration setting for the.
It is. It's even less than that now. If you have the connection string in your app, we figure out that you need to go there, and we go there.
Oh,
you don't even have to change the code anymore. So there is a way that you can customize that behavior, which is all documented. But you don't even need a server anymore. With the Azure SignalR service, you can actually go with serverless mode, and you can do things with like Azure Functions and Azure SignalR service bindings, which we've had Anthony Chu on the show and talked about a few times. Which you can, you don't even need a server with a hub anymore. You can just bounce stuff off the service and go crazy. And since we have clients for JavaScript, TypeScript, Java, and .NET, you can kind of run the gamut. There's
a C++ one, isn't there? I thought there's
a C++ client that's in development. We want to ship that in the 5-wave. It's been perpetually in development for quite some time. Brendan Conroy is just doing his best on that project. But we want to ship it in 5. And we hope that the C++ client would enable more lower level development efforts. We also have an open source iOS client, which you can find. We do not have a plan at this time to ship a Microsoft licensed iOS client for SignalR. If you have input on that, please get it to me. The big question we've asked back and forth with folks is, would you want to have it in Swift or Objective-C? Feels like a 50-50. Also feels like a 50-50 of people that wouldn't use the other. So, we don't have time to build and maintain both, so we really want to, hedge our bets wisely there. So if you need an iOS client, I am the guy you want to reach out to, and I'll yell at Fowler and we'll figure out how to do it one day.
Cool. This makes me think a little bit of like PWAs. Is there any kind of anything special you would do or whatever with a PWA with the?
There is a little special stuff that you have to do inside of the PWA. Now, there's some interesting checkboxes in the latest preview release on the Blazor side where you can actually check a box and it becomes a PWA, and that just works flawlessly. So you could build a Blazor app today, check the box, and get a PWA right out of the gate. Since Blazor uses SignalR, then that's going to work, for you. I have talked to some customers who've had some issues with some stuff that I do not know anything about in the JavaScript client side, which is service workers. When people want to do service workers, I think with React.js, is it React.js or Angular? I'm probably showing that I don't know those frameworks anymore. But we want to figure out that one. There's one bug that I got on that we want to kind of investigate. I've talked to Fowler about it, and we just haven't had the time to really go deep on it yet.
Well, somebody was asking where to find the iOS client. So in the docs, I see a link there. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, a lot of good questions and excitement from the from chat. People are excited about this. People talking about how pretty cheap the SignalR services, the Azure SignalR services is. I was surprised,
It's not bad. It's not bad. I will say this: if you start to look at that, one thing to factor in is you are billed by connections. I've talked to customers who have, tiny little devices, and their business might consist of lots of customers to which they ship many, 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 many tiny little devices that stay on all the time. You can imagine that bill would begin to eke up a little bit. So do have that in your mind. Think about capacity planning when you're thinking about your consistent connections. So
isn't there like an Azure SignalR service calculator? I thought Azure had like all these different calculators. Okay.
There is. And John, I just dropped the link for the iOS client in the Teams, so I'll let you pop that back out to folks.
Cool. Okay. Let me see. There's a question about how SignalR compares to gRPC streaming.
That's a great question. SignalR and gRPC streaming have quite a few differences. I'm not too deep in the gRPC area. We want to have maybe James Newton King on to talk a little bit more about that. Obviously, gRPC is going to use HTTP3. SignalR does not sit on top of HTTP3 yet. I'd love to do that one day. Don't have any cards for it. Still experimental. But with gRPC streaming, you get the bidirectionality. With SignalR, you also get the bidirectionality. The streaming, the client to server and server to client streaming APIs in SignalR, we have some opportunities to make them a little bit more elegant in the future, especially when it comes to doing things like juggling multiple streams at the same time. If you were to remember the demo that I did on the show about a year ago when we announced client-side streaming called, what was that thing called? Streamer, streamer.azurewebsites.net. That has some code in it that is interesting code where we're literally managing the incoming and outgoing streams. We want to make that more elegant for folks in the future. I think that experience in the gRPC client is a little bit more elegant, if not a lot more elegant. We'd like to do the same thing in the SignalR area. But in terms of perf, I can't give you perf numbers on it. Again, that's probably, and it depends what kind of a server or microservice you're running in the back end.
Okay.
But you also have the protobuf description, which is nice. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly.
That's nice. That's nice. So Rico did some experimentation with describing SignalR hubs. I love Rico. I love the work he does. But people weren't into it. Customers didn't like it. So, customers told us they didn't really like SignalR description. It wasn't something that they would do.
Okay. I'm pasting the client over. Any other questions? I mean, there's people are just generally like they love it. Let me see. This is a little different. I mean, this is a question on gRPC instead of GraphQL between backends. I don't think this is necessarily the right group. Yeah, we did a show a week ago, I believe it was, it was very recently we did gRPC. So probably some questions that are coming up on gRPC. Those would be good to look at. Very cool. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I'm just thinking about the things you're doing, because part of what's amazing about SignalR is you abstract over the different transports. And so as a developer building across different languages and browsers and now devices, you know what I mean? I don't have to think about that. I use a hub, I send messages out, and then this magic happens.
Yeah, exactly right.
But you still get the specificity, right? Where you can configure it and it's finite. You can say, I want it to be this transport or this protocol, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you don't have to do that. You know what I mean? So I don't have to become a WebSocket guru or whatever it is, the next thing, or when. So that's cool. I was wondering a bit, like with you were talking about like the C++, and then also you mentioned some of the things with the like small devices when you have like lots of IoT things connecting. Is there any way to throttle down the connection, like how chatty it is? I guess that's more of I need to not put stuff on the hub that I don't want sent, because you're just transferring the information.
We're really just transferring. You can control both the way you're feeding data into the hub and you can feed the way you're getting it out on the client as well. You do have the capability to customize that. Now, if you were to get into the streaming world, then you can get access to the channel, and then you can get access to back pressure. You know what I mean? So you could say, I only want to process 100 at a time, I only process 1,000 at a time, or you can do something really dangerous and say unbounded, which if you do that and Fowler finds your code, he'll send you a pull request. Because essentially you can just flood your server at that point. But you do have that control. But when you're getting into the streaming stuff, you're going to need to do a little more coding. It's going to be a little more work. When you start messing around with async and enumerable T, you really got to think about how you're going to deal with that.
Yeah.
For me, starting to work with async and enumerable was fun because I would say, well, I want to get the thing back, and I would run my code, and nothing happened. I gotta go turn the thing on. I turn the thing on, and all of a sudden they start. And it's just that await just keeps hanging out every time I get one. That's a weird way to think for a .NET programmer, because I think we always think we'd have to go back down to sockets, even though none of us want to. So we don't have to anymore.
Well, I know you've got a big meeting here coming up in just a few minutes. So how about we wrap up, and if you want to share, I can add the link for source code and anything else into the community links for this week. Anything else you want to point people to just for keeping up to date with what's new in Blazor land?
Probably share that one blog from Dan Roth that introduces the .NET client.
Yeah, I would say devblogs.microsoft.com/ASP.NET, our site. Whenever we do even the most incremental of an update, we'll put a blog post out there. And I have an email in my inbox right now from Dan that we want to work together to make sure that the Blazor documentation is better. So we're going to be doing some stuff there. If there are any needs that you have in the Blazor documentation area or anything specific, we'd love to hear about it. We want to make sure that experience is a good one for you. So.
Is there a public Blazor roadmap that people can keep an eye on?
I don't know. That would be a Dan Roth question.
Okay. All right. Cool.
I don't have a sequin jacket, so I don't feel comfortable.
Not yet. You need a SignalR sequin jacket.
I have a T-shirt from Isaac.
That's very nice.
That's good.
It's party in real time. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, I'm conscious you got a big meeting, so thanks. This was awesome, and thank you for welcome to David. First of many shows we'll have you on. So,
awesome.
cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.